In this next couple of videos, we're going to talk about verticals and we're going to talk about promotion and advertising strategies into existing and new verticals. So before we get into that, let's take another look at our academic definition that we've looked at a couple of times before. So at the beginning here, it says entrepreneurial marketing is a proactive identification and exploitation of opportunity to obtain customers. We'll just add the word customers right there. So we're going to focus now on this proactive identification and exploitation of opportunity to obtain customers. So what are the considerations that we need to think about as we start to take our product or our service and take it into either a new vertical or an existing vertical? So let's take a look at this chart real quick. So this right here shows different types of markets, a new market, something that's just been created, versus an existing market where people are already doing business and selling. And we look at products. We look at taking a new product into one of those types of markets or an existing product into one of those types of markets. And so we're going to talk about right now some of the considerations that we need to think about as we tackle one of these four quadrants. So let's focus first on an existing product into an existing market. So if we are taking a product that already exists and the world knows about, and we're trying to enter into a market that already exists, really it's about market share and branding. It's about telling a better story. It's about getting people to switch over to us as opposed to something else. This would be an example of Pepsi and Coke were fighting over a particular region, and they just wanted to boost their image in that region to take market share from the other competitor. And so that's really an existing product fighting it out in an existing market. Now let's look at what about a new product going into an existing market. So this is about market share, this is about branding, and it's about nurturing the client. So I put on here this example of Rockstar versus Red Bull. So Rockstar versus Red Bull, one of those was the original and the other was a challenger that came into this existing beverage market. So beverages have been around forever. The process of going to a restaurant, going into a convenience store, going to the grocery store, all the different venues where we source beverages, this has been around for a long, long time. But then when you start to look at how Red Bull entered in, so Red Bull entered into the market at a time that really there wasn't a lot of energy drink. In fact, the word energy drink didn't even mean what it means today. And so they entered in and they brought this new product into an existing market. But now you've got Rockstar, you've got Monster, you've got all of these huge brands, and there's other brands that have come along that have started to grab a little momentum. But really, what is the difference between a Rockstar and a Red Bull? So what I mean by that is if I asked you to define those, tell me what is really the difference. You might make some comments like Red Bull is maybe the more refined, the higher end brand. Rockstar is the more accessible brand. Rockstar is always about mass quantity. Buy 2, buy 3 for this discounted price. And so they kind of use their pricing as part of how they enter into that market. And so the differences, and it's subtle differences because they're both energy drinks, they're both highly caffeinated, but there has to be a reason why somebody goes into a convenience store and walks out with a Red Bull versus a Rockstar. And those are two very different price points for a very similar product. And so again, it's about market share and the tactics we use to grab market share in an existing market. It's about branding, about the story that we tell about our product. And then it's about nurturing the customer. And, over time, how do we continue to create advocates as customers and endear them to our brand? Let's look now at a new product going into an existing market. So if I said that wrong, a existing product going into a new market. That's what I was trying to say. So if we look at something like facebook.com/express, I don't know if you ever saw that particular URL, but Express is a clothing store. They have a women's clothing and they have a men's clothing store. And Express is a brand that's been around on this planet for quite a long time. But they were invited in by Facebook to be the first company to ever bring e-commerce to the Facebook URL. So there was a thought a long time ago, back when social media was really starting to catch its momentum, where we thought the entire world was going to turn to social media. And social media has become a big part of people's lives, but it sort of serves its purpose, and we're aware of what that purpose is. And it doesn't have this infinite capacity to just grow and take over our banking and our purchasing and our transportation. I mean, it has some limits, and we've kind of figured this out as a population. But back in the early days, before we didn't know really what the limits were, Facebook was trying some things to bring some retailers onto Facebook and have them use a new monetary system called a Facebook credit. And Express was the first store that ever was created as an e-commerce store on Facebook, where you could check out with a Visa, a MasterCard, American Express, or you could use a Facebook credit. And they would offer discounts and encourage people to use those Facebook credits. Now, this was a chance for Facebook to get a hold of the action a little bit because they controlled that monetary system. But really, this was a chance for Express to take an existing product line and take it to a completely new marketplace. And so when we do that, it's about awareness and education. So what we mean by that is, you already know who my product, you know what my product is, you know who I am, you know my brand. We're now going to go over to this new venue where nobody's ever done business before. And so our job is to educate consumers that this is a thing, and our job is to provide awareness. So plant the seed and then educate over time and get it to where people know when they want to make a purchase, they should go to this location. Now, ultimately, the Facebook.com/Express store failed and they shut it down. It was just too weird of a concept. Too many people struggled with the idea of going to Facebook to do their shopping. The Facebook frame, which is the area they were allowing the store to operate, because you still need the Facebook logo at the top and all the settings. The problem is as that whole thing moves to mobile, you have such a small area to do the shopping that it didn't really work out, because Facebook needed their name and their banner involved, and it didn't leave enough for the shopping experience. So there was a lot of things fighting against it why it didn't work, but again, it was about awareness and then education. So the other example I put down here was the iPod cable. Well, when I was a kid, the 3.5 millimeter male audio cable had been around for a long time. So we used to use components, and we would stack a record player, a tape player, a tuner, which is like an FM radio or an AM radio. We'd have an amplifier, and we'd have this stack of 4, 5, 6 different components, and then we'd have our speaker system. And part of, being an audiophile and listening to a lot of different music was about knowing how to hook up those components and what the best way was. And so speakers hooked up differently than, maybe a DVD player or a CD player or a record player. And one of the things that was just kind of this tried and true way to connect one device to another was to use what we now know as an aux cable or an iPod cable. But back in those days, it was a 3.5 millimeter male-to-male cable. And they sold them in, a 3 foot, a 6 foot, a 12 foot length. There was lots of different lengths of these cables, and this is how you'd run audio from one device to another. I'd even had an experience where I hooked a TV up to a sound system using one of these cables. So back in the day, and when I say back in the day, this is like the early 90s, late 80s, you could walk into a Radio Shack or a Circuit City, just trying to name all these old brand names of electronic stores, but you could walk into an electronic store and you could buy one of these cables for $1 for a 3-footer. You could pay maybe $3 for a 12-footer. But you never spend more than $3 for one of these cables. It just didn't make any sense. It's a very simple, and the cable had been around for a long time. Well, before I tell you the rest of that story, I want to tell you I was sitting on an airplane one time, and I was sitting next to this older lady, and I had been upgraded to first class, which is like, woohoo, awesome, best flight ever, right? But I'm sitting next to this kind of wealthy, well-dressed older lady, and I just thought I'd be sociable, and I asked her, hey, so what do you do? Where are you going? What's going on? And she was actually returning. She'd flown through LA, and I was on a flight out of LA, but she had just returned from China, so China to LA, and then she was on her connection home. And I said, well, what were you doing in China? And she said, well, I own a factory, and I was about to retire, and then all of a sudden the iPod and the smartphone happened, and my business boomed, and now I'm going to sell the company and finally retire. But there was about a 5-year period where I was just so busy I couldn't even think of retiring. Well, what was interesting is what had happened is it was related to this iPod cable. So the 3.5 millimeter cable used to sell for $1. And then all of a sudden, Apple releases the iPod. There was a whole bunch of other MP3 players. And pretty soon we had these portable libraries, digital libraries in our hand. But we needed a way to plug that into the car, which is the best place to listen to your tunes. But we didn't have a way to plug those in. And so the cleanest way to get that iPod music into your radio was through the auxiliary port. What's funny is some of my kids, they don't even know what auxiliary is. They just know that on the radio it says AUX, and they call it an aux port or an aux cable. But so you could send the auxiliary audio into your car stereo. You could send it into a home audio. And all of a sudden, this 3.5 millimeter cable became known as the iPod cable, and then as the iPhone, and then, of course, all the Android phones. When those first generations came out, Bluetooth hadn't really been mastered yet, and there was a long period, 6-7 years of history where the primary way to get your audio out of your device into whatever system you wanted to listen to it in was through these 3.5 millimeter cables. Well, how much do those cables cost? I mean, if you walk into an electronics store or a gas station, even today, you're going to pay $10 to $15 for a very simple cable. And that's what had happened to this lady I met on the plane, is her business had boomed because she had an existing product that all of a sudden was in a new market, and she was making a ton more money. And just by coloring the cable, braided cables, pink cables, white cables, yellow cables, by stylizing the cable just a little bit, which really wasn't more production cost, all of a sudden the dollar cable is worth $10. And so she'd made a ton of money on that. Anyway, so there's an example of existing products going into new marketplaces. And then the last one here is, what about when we have a new product going into a completely new marketplace? And so this is really, again, about awareness and about education. It's going to be something that consumers don't know. They don't understand right off the bat. You're going to have to explain to them how this works. And so one example would be Facebook, another would be MySpace. So what exactly are we talking about? Well, we're talking about social networks. We're talking about friendship, this very concept of relationships, of communication, of human interaction. We have changed it at this point, and we've created this digital version. And, in my lifetime, that didn't exist. This was something that was brand new that people had to kind of figure out. And we went through some really awkward times with social media where we didn't know what was appropriate to say out loud. We didn't know what was appropriate to broadcast to the world. There was a lot of people that posted things that they didn't realize was going to be broadcasted to every one of their friends and even people they didn't know. And so there's been a lot of kind of this learning process. But the very beginning of this was really about Facebook getting people to use Facebook, or MySpace getting people to use MySpace. Now, their approaches were very different. So MySpace was much earlier than Facebook, and MySpace was about your own space. It was about customization. It was about being able to code custom backgrounds and create your own pages. Eventually, they cleaned it up and made it more of a uniform social network, trying to kind of be a sideways version of Instagram. But by that point, Facebook and Instagram were way too powerful, and MySpace could never regain market share. But the original MySpace, the original, kind of early 2000s where people had their MySpace page, it was about you being able to post your own music, your own photos, your own background, your own fonts, your own colors, and everybody's space was very, very different one from another. But we all had to learn that. So in order for them to get user adoption, it was about awareness, showing that this was a possibility, and about educating people as to what goes on. And a lot of times we become aware and we're educated through our own friends, which is a very powerful tool. So think about that as you're kind of mapping out your own product or service. How can you leverage relationships to get people to become aware and be educated? Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of a very simple case. It's an example of a product that is done really, really well. So You're probably all familiar at this point with these portable squeeze pouches. This new type of packaging has given a second life to a lot of different products. And so, applesauce had kind of hit its peak in terms of, its maximum sales until they figured out how to put it into these flexible squeeze pouches, something that you could put in your pocket, mom could throw in a purse, you could put it in a backpack. And so they're easy to transport. They're even easier for a kid than a straw because they literally can just squeeze it. So even the very smallest child, as soon as they can hold something, they can suck out of this and they can squeeze it. It's pretty simple. They're disposable, and then the nozzle keeps it all very neat and clean. And so, it's not terrifying to have a child in the back seat with one of these squeeze pouches. You're not going to have an entire back seat covered in applesauce because it's relatively a simple operation that almost any kid can do. Well, portable squeeze pouches has opened up a whole bunch of new markets. There is food for dogs and different types of nutrients that you can deliver to dogs through these squeezable pouches. There are adult versions of these, like a mixed meal replacement. People that just want to use a squeeze pouch to get that nourishment. Well, there was a company that entered into the market that tried to solve kind of an interesting problem. So if you've ever tried to give medicine to a child, once they've tasted the terrible taste of the medicine, not all kids, but most kids will fight you a little bit at least to avoid having to take that medicine. And even though we make it cherry flavored and we make it grape flavored, the flavor's a little weird and kids can see through all of that and they know it doesn't taste right. And so delivering medicine to kids has always been a difficult task. Well, so there's a new player that came on the scene called Daily Dose. So Daily Dose combined this medicine delivery with the squeezable pouch to create a new product. So what they do is they mix supplements with delicious organic meals in a pouch, and then they market it to kids and moms. They market it to fitness people for meal replacements, extreme fitness like bodybuilders. They do some special like a creatine version and different proteins. So what would our channel be? If we were going to be selling this product, how would we sell it? Where would we sell it? So that's the very first consideration. So, maybe we might want to sell it through traditional big box stores. Maybe it's a subscription. And actually, it would probably be different for each one of these customer segments. How would we determine your product or your promotion or your advertising strategy? Well, the way we promote it, the way we advertise it is directly related to how we want to sell it. So in an online store situation, maybe let's take, fitness and extreme fitness. Those are people that are always looking for a competitive edge. And they're searching where? They're searching the internet. And so having a good search strategy, having a good advertising strategy, definitely having social influencers, these work for online. However, if we're trying to sell to kids and moms, there are some, moms that are early adopters and going to search online. But the biggest part of the marketplace for family, for kids and moms is going to be through a retailer like a Target, a Walmart, a Costco. And so just encountering the product while they're in buying mode, this frame of mind, you walk into a Costco and you just know that you're going to spend $100, $200, $300, maybe even more. It's pretty easy to convince somebody to buy $10 worth of stuff when they know they're already in that buying mode. And so the promotion advertising will be different by venue. And so in the next video, what we're going to talk about is different digital channels and strategies that we might use. And I'm going to give you some information that will kind of help you prioritize, because whether we're talking about a customer market segment that goes more to big box and retail, or we're talking about more of an online, digital marketing plays a part in all of this, and it can support all of these different types of buying habits. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next video.